Some films are frightening because of what they show. Others linger because of what they refuse to explain. The Hand belongs entirely to the second category, a story where the boundaries between delusion violence and something far stranger seem to dissolve the longer you watch it. It presents itself as a tale of a severed limb returning to torment its owner, yet beneath that premise lies a deeper, more unsettling question. Where does the horror actually come from, the screen or the people creating it? When Oliver Stone set out to adapt the source material, he wasn't simply making a horror film. He was building a psychological maze from fragments of memory, frustration, and ambition. This was early in his career, long before he became a household name, and his determination to leave an impression pushed him and everyone around him into a creative pressure cooker. Michael Caine, the film's anchor, later hinted that something about the production felt charged, as if emotions ran hotter than the script allowed. Strange accidents, shifting props, unexplained movements, and tension between departments became the film's unofficial rhythm. Crew members spoke of an atmosphere that thickened at night, shoots a kind of stillness that didn't feel like silence but anticipation. Even the technical aspects, crude mechanical rigs, improvised effects, and emerging ideas about psychological storytelling seemed to pull the film towards something darker than anyone intended. For many viewers, The Hand is an oddity from the early 1980s. For those who worked on it, it was something far more personal, a project that felt at times like it resisted control. And the more you explore the stories behind its creation, the more that resistance makes sense. These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about The Hand 1981. Fact 1, the memory that sparked the entire film. Before The Hand took shape on the page, its roots lay in a private memory Oliver Stone rarely discussed in detail. When questioned about the film's origin, he often referred to witnessing an intense emotional eruption during his youth, an outburst that ended with someone's hand being injured in a way he never fully described. Stone hinted that the moment left a mark on him not because of the violence itself, but because of what happened afterward, the silence, the shock, the unspoken fear in the room. He carried that memory for years, and when he encountered Mark Brandel's novel, The Lizard's Tale, something in it unlocked that long-buried image. Stone's adaptation process was erratic from the beginning. The early drafts changed tone, constantly shifting between psychological introspection and raw horror. Even Michael Caine, accustomed to chaotic productions, noticed the instability in the script. Scenes appeared without warning, character motivations shifted mid-paragraph, and Stone often rewrote dialogue minutes before shooting. It was as if he wasn't just adapting a novel, he was wrestling with something personal that refused to be nailed down cleanly. That emotional volatility seeps into the final film. The paranoia, the bursts of rage, the creeping sense that something is following the protagonist, they all mirror a memory Stone never fully articulated. The film may be about a severed hand, but the real story is the wound beneath it. And for Stone, that wound came long before the cameras rolled. Fact 2, Michael Caine entered the film for all the wrong reason. Michael Caine signed on to The Hand during a transitional moment in his career driven less by inspiration than by practicality. He had just emerged from a series of uneven roles and saw the project as a chance to maintain momentum while waiting for something more substantial. On paper, Stone's screenplay felt intriguing but unfinished, a mix of ambition and chaos that Caine couldn't quite categorize. He accepted the role anyway, believing that even a flawed film could offer an opportunity to challenge himself. Once filming began, however, Caine realized he had stepped into something far more demanding than expected. Stone's directing style was relentless. He pushed Caine to strip away emotional restraint, demanding exhaustion, anger, and despair with an almost confrontational intensity. Caine later mentioned that Stone directed as though he were trying to unlock something buried inside the character or perhaps inside himself.
Scenes were repeated over and over, not for precision, but for rawness.
Stone wanted the edges rough. This approach left Caine drained. He described moments during production when he felt the line between acting and emotional exposure blur uncomfortably. Although critics later praised his performance for its intensity, Caine rarely spoke about the role afterward. His silence wasn't dismissive, it was protective. Some films leave actors proud, others leave them thoughtful. The Hand left Caine remembering how thin the boundary between performance and vulnerability can become. Fact 3: technical glitches that defied logic. Even in an era of mechanical effects and analog equipment, the number of unexplained technical issues on The Hand stood out. Cameras that had functioned flawlessly on previous productions jammed during key takes, sometimes in the middle of crucial emotional beats. Lighting rigs flickered as though responding to movement that wasn't there. Sound recordists complained of faint, rhythmic noises bleeding into the audio soft taps, resembling fingers against metal, impossible to isolate or remove. Most incidents centered around the hero hand prop. During one shoot, the mechanical hand abruptly twitched before the operator touched the controls, startling several crew members. The effects department blamed an electrical short, but later tests showed no irregularities and the rig performed without issue for the rest of the day. The operator insisted he had never seen a pneumatic system behave that way. The most unsettling malfunction occurred during a car window sequence. A controlled impact meant to lightly strike the glass instead shattered it with unexpected force, sending fragments across the set. Luckily, no one was injured, but the engineers were baffled. They recreated the setup repeatedly, yet the rig behaved normally afterward, never replicating the original burst of power. These glitches didn't halt production, but they shaped the film's reputation behind the scenes. Crew members joked nervously about the prop being temperamental, though few found the situation funny in the moment. Whether caused by wiring issues, stress-induced perception, or something harder to categorize, the malfunctions contributed to the creeping sense that the film's central object had a life of its own, feeling no technical explanation, quite erased. Fact 4: the shot Oliver Stone treated like a secret. There was one particular moment in The Hand that Oliver Stone guarded with unusual intensity, a quiet shot that on paper seemed trivial, but on set took on an almost ritualistic importance. It involved the severed hand resting motionless in a dim corner, illuminated only by a sliver of stray light. Stone insisted on filming the moment privately, dismissing most of the crew and allowing only a camera operator to remain. No one understood why the scene required solitude. It wasn't violent, elaborate, or technically complex. But Stone returned to it repeatedly, demanding take after take with minimal variation. When editors later reviewed the footage, they noticed subtle irregularities. Shadows shifted slightly between takes, even when the lighting setup hadn't changed. The background seemed to deepen in tone from one frame to the next. These weren't major deviations, but they were enough to make the editor question whether the set had been altered without documentation. It hadn't. Everything was exactly as recorded. Stone never offered a real explanation. When questioned, he simply said the scene captured the moment the story breathes. His phrasing unsettled several crew members who already felt the film carried a weight Stone refused to fully acknowledge. One assistant director believed Stone saw The Hand not as a prop, but as a symbol of some unresolved fragment of his own past, something he needed to isolate before he could move on. Regardless of Stone's intentions, the resulting shot remains one of the film's eeriest images. Nothing moves. Nothing changes. Yet something about it feels wrong, as though the stillness itself is watching. Fact 5. The effects team that built the impossible. The special effects crew assigned to the hand didn't walk into a typical early 80s horror project. They quickly discovered that Stone's expectations exceeded the limitations of every mechanical tool available at the time. The severed hand had to crawl, twist, recoil, and strike with unsettling precision movements that couldn't be accomplished with standard puppetry or wires alone. As a result, the team began improvising methods that bordered on experimental engineering. They combined miniature hydraulics with hand-tuned springs, constructed multi-jointed rigs, and even rigged hidden pulleys inside furniture to control the hand's path. One technician described the process as inventing anatomy for something that shouldn't exist. Early prototypes failed dramatically. Joints locked fingers, bent in impossible directions, and one test model collapsed mid-motion like a living creature losing consciousness. The team's breakthroughs came only after embracing imperfection. Instead of aiming for fluid human-like movement, they leaned into unnatural rigidity, slight spasms and jerks that made the hand feel disturbingly alive. The result was so convincing that test viewers initially suspected the filmmakers had used a real preserved hand for some shots. Rumors later circulated about a hyper-realistic mold cast from an actual cadaver. The studio denied it, but the consistency of the rumor suggested someone somewhere had said too much. The effects team never confirmed or denied the story, leaving it suspended in ambiguity. Their work became a fusion of craftsmanship and improvisation, a strange engineering feat that mirrored the obsessive atmosphere of the entire production. And even they admitted that some of the hand's most convincing movements weren't fully within their control. Fact 6. The accident that altered the film's destiny. There was a moment during filming when fiction and chaos collided so abruptly that it reshaped the story's trajectory. During a complex stunt involving collapsing debris, a structural frame gave way seconds earlier than planned. The stunt performer escaped with only scratches, but the camera captured something unexpected: the silhouette of the severed hand sliding through the falling props in a way the rig wasn't designed to perform. When Stone viewed the footage, he became transfixed. He watched the moment repeatedly, convinced the accidental movement held more emotional power than anything he had staged. The motion wasn't clean or mechanical. It was clumsy, almost desperate, as though the prop were reacting rather than acting. Stone immediately began rethinking the ending, abandoning the more ambiguous psychological conclusion in favor of a version that gave the hand a more tangible and violent presence. Producers pushed back, arguing that the shift clashed with the film's tone. Stone disagreed. To him, the accident revealed the film's true nature, a phrase that left many crew members uneasy. They viewed the incident as a near disaster. Stone saw it as a message. Traces of the accident remain subtly woven into the final act. Viewers who look closely can spot a flicker of the original footage, an unnatural twitch that none of the engineered rigs could ever replicate. It's a reminder that the film's most iconic moment wasn't designed. It was discovered in the split second when control slipped away. Fact 7. The crew member who refused to finish his shift. One of the most unsettling moments on the hand happened far from the camera's spotlight. A veteran technician assigned to handle the mechanical hand during a fog-heavy night sequence began noticing minor discrepancies, tiny movements occurring before his cues, subtle finger twitches that didn't match the rig's programming. At first, he blamed delayed response time, the kind of hiccup common in early pneumatic systems. But then, during a reset between takes, the hand lurched forward without a single command being triggered. He froze. The rest of the crew thought he had simply missed his timing, but the technician insisted he hadn't even touched the controls. Moments later, while repositioning lighting stands, he swore he saw the hand pivot slightly on the floor as though following his footsteps. His reaction was immediate. He stepped away from the set, removed his headset and announced he wouldn't continue the shift. Attempts to reason with him failed. He wasn't angry or dramatic, just deeply shaken, describing the incident as the moment something crossed a line. By the time the assistant director went outside to speak with him, the technician was already driving off the lot. He never returned, never collected the remainder of his paycheck, and avoided all interviews related to the film. Most productions have stressful nights, but this was different. Even the crew members who dismissed superstition admitted the atmosphere changed after that walkout. The incident became a silent warning when the person closest to the prop refuses to touch it again. The line between malfunction and something else becomes disturbingly thin. Fact 8, the lost draft that revealed a darker film. Long before The Hand reached theaters, there existed a script draft that few people ever saw a version Stone wrote during a period of intense creative turmoil. This draft didn't follow the traditional structure of a psychological thriller. Instead, it spiraled into fragmented hallucinations, feverish imagery, and scenes that blurred so seamlessly with reality that even the protagonist seemed uncertain whether he was awake or dreaming. Studio executives who skimmed the early pages reacted with alarm. The violence wasn't the issue. It was the emotional exposure, the way the narrative seemed to peel back layers of the character's psyche until only raw instinct remained. One executive described the script as like reading someone's subconscious without permission. The studio demanded revisions, urging Stone to pull the story back towards something coherent and commercially viable. Years later, fragments of the draft resurfaced through a former assistant who described scenes unlike anything in the final cut. One involved the protagonist confronting a reflection of himself that refused to mirror his movements. Another depicted the hand perched on his chest at night, its fingers tapping in a rhythmic pattern like a message he couldn't decipher. None of these ideas survived the studio notes yet. Their tone lingers faintly in the completed film. Stone never confirmed the draft's existence, publicly dismissing questions with vague comments about experiments. But for those who glimpsed its pages, it represented a darker version of The Hand, not a horror film, but a confession written in symbolic form. And perhaps that was the problem, it revealed too much. Fact 9, the score that disturbed even the crew. James Horner approached The Hand with the mindset that sound should not merely accompany fear, but create it. Instead of traditional horror motifs, he layered delicate strings with unsettling metallic pulses, building a sonic texture that seemed to crawl beneath the dialogue. The recordings contained high-frequency tones that hovered just below conscious recognition, enough to provoke discomfort without appearing overtly aggressive. During early mixing sessions, several crew members requested brief breaks because the score made them nauseous or anxious. One sound engineer described a faint vibration in his jaw whenever certain cues played, as if the music were resonating through bone rather than air. Horner took this as encouragement. The more uneasy the reactions, the more convinced he became that the score was achieving its intended effect. Stone embraced the experimental approach, insisting that the music remain sharp and invasive. But the studio grew concerned when test audiences reacted physically fidgeting, glancing around, or expressing an unexplainable sense of dread, even during quiet scenes. Some executives pushed for modifications, fearing the soundscape was too hostile. Though softened slightly for release, traces of Horner's original design remain buried in the final mix. Careful listeners have noticed faint, scratching textures beneath the orchestration, subtle enough to question whether the sound is part of the score or something else layered unintentionally. The ambiguity only enhances the film's atmosphere. In the end, the most unsettling aspect of the soundtrack wasn't what it emphasized, but what it suggested, that fear can be felt long before the audience understands why. Fact 10, the night a technician walked away without a word. The incident happened during a late-night exterior shoot, the kind of session where fatigue blurs judgment and shadows seem to grow heavier than they should. A seasoned crew member responsible for assisting with the mechanical hand kept noticing tiny inconsistencies, a misplaced finger, a brief tremor that didn't match the signal, a subtle tilt, as though the prop were trying to orient itself towards something behind the camera. At first, he dismissed it as exhaustion. Then the hand jerked sharply during a reset, even though the operator's controls were still. The technician froze, staring at the unmoving prop as if waiting for it to twitch again. No one else had seen the moment clearly. They simply noticed his sudden silence, the way he stepped back slowly like someone retreating from a living animal. When the assistant director asked if he was all right, the technician didn't answer. He removed his equipment belt, placed it on a crate, and walked off into the darkness. He didn't come back. He didn't return calls. By the next morning, production had replaced him, though no one felt comfortable discussing the matter openly. Stone dismissed the walkout as nerves, but a few crew members confided later that the technician seemed genuinely frightened, not of the film, but of the idea that the hand might have reacted independently. Whatever he saw that night was never replicated. The rig worked perfectly afterward, but the unease he left behind lingered, marking one of the points where the film's fiction began leaking into real life. Fact 11, the hand that needed a human to feel alive. Mechanical rigs could only do so much. To create the strangest motions, the ones that felt impulsive, erratic, disturbingly intentional, the production hired a mime whose ability to isolate and contort individual muscles bordered on anatomical illusion. His task was simple but unnerving: perform the movements of a severed hand while hiding the rest of his body in impossible positions behind furniture, under tables, or within tight shadows. The mime's movements were so precise that even crew members reviewing playback sometimes forgot a human had performed them. His fingers crawled like independent creatures, twisting, sliding, and clutching with a subtlety no machine could replicate. But the physical toll was enormous. Hours of shooting left him numb, cramped, and shaken. He described feeling separated from his own hand, a sensation that troubled him more deeply than he admitted on set. The strangest moment came during one overnight shoot. Stone noticed that the mime's hand moved with an urgency not present in rehearsal, a sudden burst of agitation, like a trapped animal searching for escape. When Stone asked what had motivated the shift, the mime responded that he couldn't remember performing it that way. He believed he had followed the planned choreography exactly. Stone kept the take. The mime, unsettled by his own lapse, finished production, but later abandoned physical contortion roles entirely. In hindsight, the most unnerving motion in the hand wasn't mechanical at all. It was human instinct pushed to a point where even the performer questioned who or what was guiding his movements. Fact 12, the sequence the studio demanded bury. During editing, Stone assembled a mid-film sequence intended to plunge viewers into the protagonist's unraveling state, a slow, dreamlike walk through a darkened house punctuated by faint scraping noises that grew louder with each room he entered. The culmination was a shot of the severed hand resting unnervingly still, too still, according to early viewers, as though waiting for something unseen to command it. What disturbed executives weren't the visuals, but the background. Several who saw the rough cut claimed they noticed a vague shape-shifting behind the hand, barely a smudge at the edge of the frame, yet unmistakably present. When they paused the footage, the shadow seemed to bend forward in a posture resembling someone whispering into the darkness. Others said the scene felt contaminated, as though it introduced supernatural implications the film never acknowledged elsewhere. The studio insisted the sequence be removed, immediately citing concerns about tonal inconsistency. Privately, however, executives admitted they didn't want audiences focusing on the shadow instead of the narrative. Stone resisted, arguing the ambiguity strengthened the film's emotional disorientation, but his protests failed. The entire 5-minute segment, meticulously shot over a week, was pulled from the final cut. Only a few crew members ever saw the full sequence again, stored temporarily in an editing archive before being quietly discarded. And those who did insisted the shot didn't imply a ghost or demon. It implied a presence, something watching not only the character but the audience themselves. Fact 13, the unseen presence that guided Stone's camera. Throughout production, Oliver Stone often referred to an idea that puzzled even his closest collaborators, a subtle directive he called the Watcher. He instructed the cinematographer to shoot many scenes as if someone else were present, lingering only a few feet beyond the character's awareness. The third angle wasn't a character, nor was it the audience's perspective. It was something Stone claimed existed within the story itself, an invisible figure observing events with quiet judgment. Actors found the direction strange. When Caine asked who this unseen presence was supposed to represent, Stone responded vaguely, something he's hiding from. The explanation offered no clarity, yet it shaped the way shots were framed. Corners that should have been empty were left conspicuously dark. Hallways stretched longer than the set measurements suggested. Camera pans slowed at odd moments, as if waiting for a figure who never arrived. Some crew members chalked it up to stylistic experimentation. Others said that once Stone introduced the concept, they actually began to feel it, a tension in the empty spaces of each frame. One lighting technician admitted he avoided standing alone behind the set walls at night because it felt like stepping into a place meant for someone else. Years later, Stone denied the presence ever had a definitive identity, insisting it was just an artistic tool. But those who worked under his direction believed otherwise. The Watcher wasn't simply part of the film's aesthetic. It was a force Stone treated with recognizable caution, a presence he didn't want to define because some part of him thought it might be real. And once you know it's there, every lingering shot in the hand feels like a doorway into something waiting just out of sight. Fact 14, the prop that refused to rest. Among all the stories from the hand, none unsettled the crew as consistently as the behavior of one specific prop the hero hand used for the most detailed close-ups. Unlike the other models, which stayed exactly where they were placed, this one seemed to subtly shift its position between takes. Not dramatically, just enough to be noticeable to anyone tracking continuity. Prop masters attempted to control for temperature, vibration, even airflow from nearby equipment. They placed markers around the hand documenting its exact orientation before and after each shot. Yet the changes persisted, slight rotations, barely perceptible tilts and shifts in how the fingers curled. Even when locked in a storage room overnight, the hand was occasionally found angled differently the next morning. One assistant grew so unnerved that he began photographing the hand at the end of every shift to reassure himself he wasn't imagining things. Instead, the photos only fueled his anxiety. Some showed the hand leaning a degree or two off its original alignment. Others revealed micro-adjustments in the fingers' adjustments too deliberate to blame unsettling material. Stone dismissed the concerns publicly, but privately he always requested that particular prop for emotional scenes. He said it had presence, a word that troubled many who heard it. The hand eventually disappeared after production, never accounted for in the final inventory. To this day, its whereabouts remain unknown, and those who worked closest with it still refuse to discuss the nights they entered the prop room, only to find the hand lying in a position no one claimed responsibility for. Fact 15, the night the set went dark without a cause. Late in production, an incident occurred that unnerved even the crew members who prided themselves on practical explanations. During an indoor sequence just seconds after Stone called action, every piece of equipment shut down simultaneously. Lights dimmed to black. Monitors flickered off. Sound recorders died mid-waveform. Even the generators routinely checked and triple secured sputtered to silence. For a moment, the set felt suspended in a kind of void. Crew members reported hearing soft, irregular tapping in the darkness, though no two accounts agreed on its direction. One grip claimed he felt movement brush past his ankle, while another swore he heard breathing close enough to fog the air. When emergency lights finally kicked on, no one spoke for several seconds. It was as though the set itself had exhaled. Electricians inspected the circuits. Nothing was overloaded. Nothing was tripped. Logs showed no anomaly. The power simply ceased, then returned without explanation. Even stranger, none of the backup systems registered the outage, as if the loss of electricity had bypassed them entirely. Stone refused to treat the incident as anything more than technical inconvenience, but his reaction was noted. Instead of frustration, he seemed energized, telling the cast to use whatever you felt in the next take. The crew didn't appreciate the sentiment. Many believed the darkness hadn't been empty. What happened that night left no evidence, no fault reports, no reason to halt production. But those who were there all recall the same chilling truth. For several minutes, the set felt less like a workplace and more like a place being observed. Fact 16, the frame that was never shot. During the long nights of post-production, one of the editors encountered a detail so baffling that he initially assumed it was fatigue playing tricks on him. While reviewing a transitional cut between two unrelated scenes, he noticed a stray frame, a single image lasting barely a heartbeat, containing what looked like the reflection of an eye on a metallic surface.
Startled, he froze the reel and scanned the surrounding footage.
The frame didn't belong to either scene. It didn't match any camera angle, lighting setup, or recorded shot. He consulted the negative logs. Nothing. No alternate takes. No discarded footage using similar imagery. The frame simply existed without origin. When he showed it to Stone, the director studied it with an unreadable expression before offering a strange answer. Sometimes the film reveals what we didn't know we were shooting. The editor removed the frame, fearing it would raise questions he couldn't answer. But years later, during restoration, technicians located a similar anomaly, this time a distorted shape that resembled a mouth appearing in a completely different reel. Once again, the surrounding footage offered no explanation. Some believed it was chemical degradation. Others suspected accidental exposure. Yet those who inspected the image closely felt an undeniable sense of discomfort, like encountering a face pressing against a thin layer of glass. Whether error or apparition, the phantom frames suggested a haunting possibility that the film recorded something no one remembered filming. Fact 17, the ending Stone wanted but abandoned. Long before the final cut of The Hand was shaped by accidents and studio notes, Oliver Stone conceived an ending that would have pushed the film into deeply unsettling territory. Instead of focusing solely on the severed hand, Stone envisioned the protagonist glimpsing fragmented versions of himself dispersed throughout the environment, a hand twitching in a mirror, a silhouette moving independently in a window, a reflection smiling when he was not. The concept wasn't literal dismemberment. It was psychological disintegration made visible. Storyboards showed a climax where the protagonist confronted these fragments, each representing an emotion he refused to acknowledge. Fear, rage, guilt, all rendered as physical distortions of his own body. It was an ambitious attempt to visualize the internal collapse of identity. But the studio reacted with concern. The imagery was too abstract, too introspective, too far removed from the narrative audiences expected. Budget limitations also made the complex visual effects nearly impossible for a 1981 production. Reluctantly, Stone abandoned the idea, replacing it with a more concrete confrontation involving the hand itself. Still echoes of his earlier vision linger in the film, off-angle reflections, lingering shots of empty spaces, shadows that don't fully match the actors. Fans who study the movie closely insist these remnants reveal a glimpse of the ending stone, originally intended one where the true monster wasn't the severed hand, but the fractured self behind it. Fact 18, the screening that left everyone speechless. When the first assembled cut of the hand was shown to studio executives, the reaction was not dramatic outrage or enthusiastic praise. It was an unnerving silence. As the credits rolled, no one moved. No one spoke. The atmosphere felt thick, as though the room itself were waiting for someone to break the paralysis. One executive left early, refusing to offer notes, and reportedly muttered that the film felt like eavesdropping on a breakdown. The concerns weren't about marketability or pacing. What bothered them was the psychological heaviness radiating from the film, a suffocating sense of despair that clung to every scene. Some thought Stone had allowed his personal demons to bleed too openly into the narrative. Others felt the movie projected a kind of emotional violence not easily shaken off. A projectionist later recounted a strange detail during a reel change. He heard a soft tapping from inside the booth, rhythmic and deliberate. He assumed it was a loose film canister until the tapping stopped the moment he approached the back wall. When he checked again after the screening, nothing was out of place. Official records described the meeting as uncertain, but those who attended recalled a different truth. The film left them with a sense of being watched, as if the story had turned its gaze outward. It wasn't fear that silenced them, it was recognition. Fact 19. The actor who became afraid of his own trailer. One supporting actor known for his professionalism and calm temperament experienced something during production that he never discussed publicly, but confided quietly to colleagues. For his role, he kept one of the hand props in his trailer to rehearse reactions, studying every detail to ensure authenticity. But soon he began noticing subtle changes, the prop positioned differently than he remembered, fingers curled at angles he was certain he had not arranged. He tried dismissing it as fatigue, long days, dim lighting, and the psychological strain of working on a horror film. But the incidents escalated. One afternoon, he returned to find the hand resting on his script, its fingers splayed across the page, describing his character's final scene. Another day, he discovered it balanced at the edge of his sink, poised as though ready to slip into the drain. No one admitted moving it. Access logs confirmed no crew members had entered his trailer. The actor grew so unsettled that he wrapped the prop in a towel and sealed it in a supply box, only to find it on his table the next morning. Whether someone was playing an elaborate prank or whether he misremembered events didn't matter. What mattered was how it made him feel, watched, singled out, chosen by something he didn't understand. By the end of production, he refused to rehearse with any props. He later said the experience taught him an unexpected lesson, not about acting, but about how easily reality slips when fear decides to take the lead. Fact 20. The theory Stone quietly encouraged. The studio pushed The Hand as a psychological thriller grounded in rational explanation, but Oliver Stone subtly cultivated a different interpretation, one that blurred the boundary between madness and manifestation. In early interviews, he would answer questions about The Hand's existence with careful ambiguity. When asked whether the killings were real or imagined, he responded, "It depends on whose reality you trust." His phrasing was deliberate, and it sparked long-lasting debate among fans. Stone shaped the film so that both interpretations remained viable. Certain scenes offered undeniable glimpses of physical movement, while others suggested the protagonist might be present during moments attributed to The Hand. Visual cues contradicted each other.
Shadows hinted at third presences.
Reflexes happened off-screen. Stone wanted audiences to struggle to question, to feel destabilized long after the credits. This ambiguity frustrated test viewers who wanted a clear answer. But for Stone, the confusion was intentional. He believed horror didn't come from monsters, it came from uncertainty. If the hand was real, the story became supernatural terror. If it wasn't, the story became psychological tragedy. But Stone's favorite theory was the one he encouraged quietly, that both realities coexist, feeding each other like reflections in a broken mirror. Over the years, fans uncovered small visual anomalies supporting this idea: a shadow that moves independently of the actor, a reflection that doesn't match the protagonist's posture, a detail that suggests the hand acts without physical presence. Stone never confirmed any of them. His silence became part of the mythology. In the end, the film's greatest weapon wasn't the severed hand at all. It was the doubt he planted, the fear that both interpretations might be true at the same time. Bonus fact: the prop that left without permission. When production wrapped, the props department conducted its routine inventory, a meticulous process designed to track every object used in the film. Most items were accounted for: the mechanical rigs, the backup molds, the damaged prototypes. But the hero hand, the one reserved for the most intimate close-ups, the one Stone insisted on using whenever he wanted a scene to feel charged, had vanished. The disappearance wasn't discovered immediately. The hand had been used on the final shooting day, passed between departments, then logged for cleaning. But when the props team opened the storage case assigned to hold it, the box was empty. The crew assumed it had been checked out accidentally. It hadn't. They searched every trailer, every effects table, every storage rack. The hand was nowhere. Security footage revealed nothing. No one entering after hours. No containers moved. No suspicious activity. The hero hand had simply ceased to exist within the boundaries of the set. Stone suspected theft, but the studio dismissed that theory. High-value props usually resurface on black markets, at auctions, and private collections. This one never did. Not even a rumor. Not even a whisper. It was as though the most iconic object in the entire production had slipped out between frames. One editor later offered a strange thought: if that hand really was the one shifting around, maybe it just kept going. He meant it as a joke, but the uneasy silence that followed made it clear no one found humor in the idea. Too many people had seen things they couldn't fully explain. Too many small details refused to align with logic. Whether stolen, misplaced, or something else entirely, the hand's disappearance left an odd vacancy, as though the story wasn't finished, merely interrupted. And for some, the most unsettling part wasn't that the hand disappeared. It's that no one ever looked for it again. A film like The Hand leaves more questions than answers, and maybe that's why it lingers long after the final frame fades. Whether you believe the horror came from a malfunctioning prop, a collapsing mind, or something that slipped through the cracks of the camera, the mystery is part of what keeps the film alive decades later. Let us know in the comments which fact reshaped the way you see this story, and whether you think the hand moved because of design or intention. And if there's another film hiding secrets beneath its surface, tell us which one you want us to open next.